The Lopez mansion, a symbol of wealth and power in the heart of an affluent community, was about to experience an unexpected upheaval. When Valeria Lopez, the adopted daughter of the influential Lopez family, discovered her true origins, she had no idea of the secrets that were about to resurface. Meanwhile, Elena Morales, an expert gardener who had spent decades working quietly on the property, harbored a devastating secret. As tensions between past and present began to crumble, the lives of these two women became unexpectedly intertwined. But Elena was not just any employee, and her connection to Valeria would soon shake the foundations of the Lopez legacy. What truths had been hidden in the shadows of this majestic mansion, and how would Valeria's journey reveal secrets that would change her life and those around her? Let's find out. But before we dive into this fascinating story of hidden truths and deep family ties, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy tales full of emotional twists and moments of redemption, don't forget to subscribe. The sun had barely risen on the horizon when Elena Morales was already on her knees in the damp soil of the Lopez mansion garden. Her calloused and experienced hands moved skillfully among the flowers, pulling weeds and adjusting the weaker stems. The morning dew moistened her face, mixing with a solitary tear that slid down her cheek. As she worked, Elena couldn't help but let her mind travel to the past, to that fateful day when her life changed forever. 20 years had passed, but the pain was still as fresh as if it had been yesterday. Her little Mateo, barely a 6-month-old baby, had disappeared without a trace. The authorities never found any clues, and over time the case was filed away, becoming just another number in the statistics of missing children. Elena shook her head, trying to push those thoughts away. She brought her hand to her chest, where a simple necklace with a butterfly-shaped charm hung. It was all she had left of Mateo, a gift she had bought him the day he was born. "Good morning, Elena." A cold and authoritative voice pulled her from her reflections. It was Valeria Lopez, the owner of the mansion, who was going out for her morning walk through the gardens. "Good morning, Mrs. Lopez," Elena responded, lowering her gaze respectfully. Valeria passed by her without giving her more than a fleeting glance. At 35, she was an imposing woman, with perfectly styled black hair and a designer suit. Her firm step and penetrating gaze made it clear that she was a woman accustomed to giving orders and having them followed without question. As Valeria walked away down the gravel path, Elena couldn't help but feel a pang in her heart. There was something about the Lopez heiress that felt painfully familiar to her, though she couldn't understand why. At the other end of the garden, Valeria stopped in front of a rose bush. Her eyes got lost in the delicate beauty of the flowers, and for a moment, her expression softened. But as soon as it appeared, that vulnerability vanished. Replaced by her usual mask of coldness, Valeria continued on her way, lost in her own thoughts. Despite her success in business and her seemingly perfect life, she felt an inexplicable emptiness inside. She had grown up surrounded by luxury, pampered by her adoptive parents, Beatriz and Rodrigo Lopez. However, she had always felt that something was missing, as if a fundamental part of her being was lost. Upon reaching her office in the mansion, he greeted, approaching to give her a kiss on the cheek. "Ready for today's meeting?" Valeria nodded mechanically. "Of course, I have everything prepared." Carlos looked at her with a mixture of pride and possessiveness. "Excellent. I expected no less from you. Remember, darling, that this contract is crucial for the company's expansion." "I know, Carlos. You don't have to remind me," Valeria responded, with a slightly irritated tone. Carlos ignored her tone and continued, "By the way, we have the charity dinner tonight. Don't forget, we must make a good impression." Valeria sighed internally. Another night of forced smiles and superficial conversations. "I'm aware of it," she responded dryly. Meanwhile, in the garden, Eleanor continued with her tasks. Her expert hands pruned the bushes with precision, shaping nature according to her employer's wishes. Suddenly, something shiny caught her attention among the leaves. Carefully, Elena pushed aside the branches and discovered a small gold necklace. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the charm. It was identical to hers, a delicate golden butterfly. With trembling hands, she picked it up, and examined it closely. "It can't be," she murmured to herself, feeling the world around her begin to spin. At that moment, she heard footsteps approaching. She quickly tucked the necklace into the pocket of her apron, just as Valeria appeared around the corner of the hedge. "Elena," Valeria called, her voice laden with authority. "I need you to prepare the garden for tonight's dinner. I want everything to be perfect." "Yes, Mrs. Lopez," Elena responded, struggling to maintain her composure. "I'll take care of everything." Valeria nodded curtly and turned to leave, but something stopped her. For an instant, her eyes met Elena's, and a strange sense of familiarity washed over her. Confused, she shook her head and quickly walked away. Elena watched her leave, her mind a whirlwind of emotions and questions. The necklace in her pocket seemed to weigh a ton, loaded with secrets and possibilities she dared not consider. As the sun rose in the sky, bathing the Lopez mansion gardens in its golden light, Elena and Valeria continued with their lives, seemingly separated by an abyss of class and circumstance. However, fate had begun to weave its threads, intertwining their paths in ways neither of them could imagine. The Lopez mansion, with its imposing walls and meticulously cared-for gardens, held secrets that would soon come to light, forever changing the lives of all who dwelled under its shadow. Night fell over the Lopez mansion, bringing with it a cool breeze that made the leaves of the trees dance in the garden. Elena, still disturbed by the discovery of the necklace, worked diligently to prepare the outdoor space for the charity dinner. Her hands moved skillfully, placing lights and arranging centerpieces, but her mind was miles away. Inside the house, Valeria was preparing for the event. In front of the mirror in her luxurious dressing room, she adjusted an elegant black dress that accentuated her slender figure. However, her reflection returned an uneasy look. The encounter with Elena in the garden had left a strange sensation in her chest, a discomfort she couldn't shake off. "Are you ready, darling?" Carlos's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He entered the room, impeccable in his designer suit, with that smile that Valeria had come to associate more with business than genuine affection. "Almost," she responded, putting on a pair of diamond earrings. "Is everything ready downstairs?" Carlos nodded. "Everything's perfect, as always. Guests will start arriving in half an hour. Remember, dear, tonight is crucial for closing the deal with the Mendozas." Valeria suppressed a sigh of frustration. Even at a charity event, Carlos couldn't stop thinking about business. "I know, Carlos. You don't have to remind me constantly." He approached and gave her a kiss on the cheek, a gesture more out of habit than affection. "I just want to make sure we're on the same page. You know how important this is for us." "For you, you mean?" Valeria muttered. But Carlos had already left the room, his mind focused on the guests and the potential contracts he hoped to close that night. Meanwhile, in the garden, Elena was giving the final touches to the decoration. The dim lights created a magical atmosphere, turning the already beautiful garden into a dreamlike setting. Despite the beauty surrounding her, Elena couldn't get the necklace she had found out of her mind. She had hidden it in her small house on the mansion grounds, unable to get rid of it, but fearful of what it might mean. Guests began to arrive, filling the garden with the murmur of elegant conversations and the clinking of champagne glasses. Elena kept to the shadows, observing the parade of expensive dresses and shiny jewels. Her eyes instinctively searched for Valeria among the crowd. When she saw her, Elena felt her breath catch. Valeria was radiant, her presence dominating the space around her, but there was something else, something Elena couldn't explain. A glint in Valeria's eyes, a way of moving that felt painfully familiar. The night progressed, and Elena moved discreetly among the guests, refilling glasses and collecting empty plates. At one point, she found herself near where Valeria was conversing with a group of guests. Without meaning to, she overheard fragments of the conversation. "And tell me, Valeria, have you never felt curious about your biological parents?" asked an older woman, her voice laden with indiscretion, barely disguised by alcohol. Elena saw how Valeria's body tensed slightly, though her face remained impassive. "My parents are Beatriz and Rodrigo Lopez," she responded firmly. "I don't need to know anything else." Valeria's response provoked an uncomfortable silence in the group, quickly broken by Carlos, who appeared at her side with a forced smile. "Ladies, gentlemen, would you mind if I steal my wife for a moment? There's someone I want to introduce her to." As they walked away, Elena couldn't help but notice the way Carlos gripped Valeria's arm, as if silently reprimanding her. The scene provoked a pang of pain and an inexplicable feeling of protection towards Valeria. The night continued, and Elena went on with her tasks, but her mind wouldn't stop spinning. The necklace, the conversation she had overheard, Valeria's reaction. Everything seemed to be connected in some way she couldn't decipher. Near midnight, when the party was starting to wind down, Elena found herself near the main fountain in the garden. There, to her surprise, she saw Valeria alone, away from the crowd. The powerful businesswoman seemed vulnerable for the first time, her gaze lost in the water that fell gently. Without thinking, Elena approached. "Are you all right, Mrs. Lopez?" she asked softly. Valeria startled, as if she had forgotten where she was. For a moment, her eyes met Elena's, and something seemed to pass between them, a current of recognition that neither of them understood. "I'm fine," Valeria responded, but her voice lacked its usual firmness. "I just needed a moment of tranquility." Elena nodded, understanding. "Sometimes silence is what we need most in the midst of noise," she said, surprising herself by daring to speak like this with her employer. Valeria looked at her curiously. "You're different, Elena, not like the other employees." "Perhaps because I see beyond appearances, Mom," Elena responded, her heart beating hard. "Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who need a little understanding the most." A flash of emotion crossed Valeria's face, so quickly that Elena almost believed she had imagined it. But before she could say anything more, Carlos's voice resonated in the garden. "Valeria, where are you? The Mendozas want to say goodbye." The moment broke. Valeria straightened up, her mask of coldness returning to its place. "Thank you, Elena," she said simply before walking away towards the party. Elena watched her leave, her heart full of contradictory emotions. Something had changed that night, though she didn't know exactly what. As she picked up an empty glass near the fountain, a glint caught her attention. There, half hidden among the decorative stones, was a small golden brooch. She picked it up carefully and examined it. It was old, with an intricate design of flowers and leaves. Without knowing why, Elena felt that this small object was important. She put it in her pocket, along with the weight of the secrets that seemed to be accumulating around her. As the last light of the party went out and the guests departed, Elena looked towards the imposing mansion. Somewhere in there, Valeria Lopez slept, unaware of the threads of destiny that were beginning to weave around her. Elena sighed, knowing that the revelations that were coming would change their lives forever. With one last glance at the garden she loved so much, she headed to her small house, carrying with her the necklace and the brooch. Two pieces of a puzzle she still didn't know how to fit together. The night after the charity party, Valeria found herself immersed in a turbulent dream. She saw herself as a small child, running through a garden that strangely resembled that of the Lopez mansion, but at the same time was different, wilder and full of life. In the dream, she heard a soft voice singing a lullaby, a melody that felt familiar and comforting to her. Valeria woke up startled, her heart beating rapidly, and a feeling of loss she couldn't explain. The melody from the dream still echoed in her mind, like a distant echo of something she had forgotten long ago. Beside her, Carlos slept deeply, oblivious to his wife's agitation. Valeria carefully got up, trying not to wake him. She put on a silk robe and went out to the balcony of her room, which overlooked the garden. The full moon bathed the landscape with its silver light, giving an almost magical appearance to the flowers and shrubs that Elena cared for so diligently. Valeria leaned on the railing, breathing deeply the cool night air. Her eyes wandered over the garden, stopping at the small house where Elena lived. For a moment, Valeria wondered what the gardener's life was like. What secrets did this woman keep, who always seemed to be observing in silence? The conversation they had had by the fountain during the party came back to her mind, and with it, a strange sense of connection that she couldn't understand. Meanwhile, in her modest dwelling, Elena was also awake. Sitting at her small kitchen table, she examined the necklace and the brooch she had found. The light of a candle cast dancing shadows on the objects, as if they had a life of their own. Elena couldn't stop thinking about Valeria. There was something in the way the Lopez heiress had looked at her that night, a vulnerability that strongly contrasted with her usual facade of coldness. Elena felt an inexplicable need to protect her, to reveal a truth that she herself didn't fully understand. With trembling fingers, Elena opened the locket of the necklace. Inside, she found a tiny photograph faded by time. Although the image was blurry, she could make out the face of a young woman holding a baby. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized herself in that photograph. "Matteo," she whispered, tears beginning to run down her cheeks. Back at the mansion, Valeria decided to go down to the garden, unable to go back to sleep. Her bare feet touched the grass wet with dew, and for a moment she felt like a child again, free and without worries. She walked aimlessly, letting the night breeze caress her skin. Without realizing it, her steps led her near Eleanor's house. A dim light filtered through the curtains, indicating that the gardener was also awake. Valeria hesitated for a moment, debating between curiosity and decorum. Finally, the need for company, for someone who saw her as something more than the powerful Lopez heiress, drove her to approach. Just as she was about to knock on the door, she heard a muffled sob coming from inside. The sound paralyzed her, recognizing in it a pain that resonated with her own. Inside the house, Eleanor struggled to contain her emotions. The discovery of the photograph had opened old wounds she thought had healed. But along with the pain, a spark of hope arose. If the necklace had appeared in the mansion's garden, did that mean her lost child could be closer than she thought? A soft knock on the door startled her. Elena hurried to dry her tears and quickly put away the necklace and the brooch before opening. Her surprise was immense to find herself face to face with Valeria Lopez. "Mrs. Lopez," said Elena, trying to regain her composure. "Is everything all right? Do you need anything?" Valeria seemed momentarily lost, as if she didn't know exactly why she was there. I couldn't sleep," she finally said. "I saw the light on and thought—" Her voice trailed off, unsure how to continue. Elena, seeing the vulnerability in Valeria's eyes, made a decision. "Would you like to come in and have a cup of tea?" she offered softly. Valeria nodded, grateful for the invitation she didn't know she needed. She entered the small house, surprised by the warmth and cozy atmosphere that strongly contrasted with the cold opulence of the mansion. Elena prepared the tea in silence, casting furtive glances at Valeria, who seemed out of place and at the same time strangely at home in this humble environment. "Thank you," Valeria murmured, when Elena handed her a steaming cup. I'm sorry for coming like this." "Unannounced," Valeria murmured. "Don't worry," Elena replied with a kind smile. "Sometimes we all need a place where we can simply be ourselves." Those words seemed to touch something deep in Valeria. Her eyes filled with tears that she struggled to contain. "Have you ever felt that your life isn't really yours?" she asked suddenly, surprising both of them with her frankness. Eleanor looked at her with understanding. "Sometimes, tonight," she said softly, "about a garden and a song. It felt so real, so familiar, but I can't remember where from." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? No, she told herself. She mustn't allow herself to hope. "Dreams sometimes show us truths that our waking minds cannot see," Elena said, carefully choosing her words. Valeria looked at her curiously. "You speak as if you know a lot about life, Eleanor. Who are you really?" The question hung in the air, loaded with a meaning that neither of them dared to fully explore. Eleanor felt the weight of the hidden necklace and brooch, secrets threatening to come to light. "I am someone who has lost much," Eleanor finally replied, her voice barely a whisper. "And who perhaps, just perhaps, is about to find what I thought was lost forever." Valeria felt those words touch something deep inside her, as if a long-closed door was slowly beginning to open. Outside, the sky was beginning to clear, announcing the arrival of dawn. A new day was approaching, bringing with it the promise of revelations that would change their lives forever. As Valeria and Elena shared this moment of unexpected connection, the secrets buried in the past began to stir, ready to surface. Fate had set its gears in motion, and there was no turning back. The days following that night of veiled confessions brought an atmosphere of change to the Lopez mansion. Valeria, usually cold and distant, found herself distracted, her mind constantly wandering to the conversation she had had with Elena. For her part, Elena struggled to maintain her composure every time she crossed paths with Valeria, aware of the weight of the secrets she kept. Carlos, always attentive to anything that could affect his business and image, was quick to notice the change in his wife's behavior. "Valeria, what's been going on with you lately?" he asked one morning, as they were having breakfast on the terrace. "You've been absent in the last meetings. The contract with the Mendozas is at stake." Valeria looked up from her coffee cup, irritated by Carlos's constant concern for business. "Not everything is about contracts and money, Carlos," she replied with a sharp tone that surprised them both. Carlos looked at her intently, a mixture of surprise and annoyance on his face. "What are you talking about? Our lifestyle, everything we have, depends on those contracts and that money." "Maybe that's the problem," Valeria muttered, more to herself than to Carlos. Before Carlos could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Beatriz Lopez, Valeria's adoptive mother. At 65, Beatriz was still an elegant woman with an imposing presence, although lately she seemed to carry an invisible weight on her shoulders. "Good morning, dears," Beatriz greeted, sitting down next to them. Her eyes, always attentive, immediately noticed the tension between the couple. "Am I interrupting something?" "Not at all, Mom," Valeria replied, grateful for the distraction. "What brings you here so early?" Beatriz hesitated for a moment, as if gathering courage. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you, Valeria, alone if possible." Carlos frowned, but before he could protest, Valeria stood up. "Of course, Mom. Let's go to my study." Once in the privacy of the study, Beatrice seemed to age 10 years in an instant. She sat heavily in one of the leather armchairs, her gaze fixed on her intertwined hands. "Valeria, there's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice trembling. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Valeria's heart began to beat hard. Could it be related to the dreams she had been having, to that feeling that something in her life didn't fit? "Your adoption," Beatrice continued, the words coming out with difficulty. "It wasn't as simple as we made you believe." Valeria remained still, feeling as if the ground beneath her feet was beginning to crumble. "What do you mean?" Beatrice looked up, her eyes full of unshed tears. "Your biological mother. She never wanted to give you up for adoption. There were circumstances, pressures. Your father and I, we did things I'm not proud of." Beatrice's words fell like bombs on Valeria's consciousness, fragments of her dreams, the lullaby, the feeling of loss that had always accompanied her. Everything began to take on a new and terrible meaning. "Are you saying I was stolen?" Valeria asked, her voice barely a whisper. Beatrice didn't respond directly, but her silence was more eloquent than any word. "I'm so sorry, my child. We thought we were doing the right thing. You needed a family, and we could give you everything." Valeria stood up abruptly, needing to put physical distance between herself and the revelations that threatened to destroy everything she thought she knew about herself. "All this time," she began, her voice shaking with rage and pain, "has my whole life been a lie?" "No, Valeria, please," Beatrice pleaded, standing up too. "Our love for you was always real. You are our daughter in all the ways that matter." But Valeria was no longer listening. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions and questions. Who was she really? Who was her true mother? And why did she feel that the answer was closer than she imagined? Without saying another word, Valeria ran out of the study, ignoring Beatrice's calls. She needed air. She needed to escape the oppression of the mansion and the lies that seemed to permeate every corner. Her steps instinctively led her towards the garden, towards the only place where she lately found some peace. And there, among the roses she herself had planted, was Eleanor. Seeing Valeria's state, Eleanor dropped the pruning shears she was holding and quickly approached. "Mrs. Lopez, what's wrong?" she asked with genuine concern. Valeria looked at her. seeing in Elena's eyes a compassion and understanding she had never found in her own family. Unable to contain herself any longer, she collapsed into the gardener's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Elena held her tightly, feeling that something fundamental was changing between them. As she held Valeria, her gaze turned towards the mansion, where she could see Beatrice's figure watching from the study window. At that moment, Elena knew that the secrets she had kept for so long could not remain hidden for much longer. Fate had set in motion a series of events that would lead to the truth, regardless of the consequences. As the morning sun bathed the garden, Valeria cried in Elena's arms, releasing years of repressed emotions. And Elena, with her heart divided between hope and fear, prepared to face a past she had never managed to leave behind. The cracks in the perfect facade of the Lopez family had turned into fissures impossible to ignore, and soon the entire edifice of lies and secrets threatened to crumble. Carlos Lopez's study was a sanctuary of power and opulence. Leather-bound books lined the walls, and the aroma of fine tobacco permeated the air. Seated behind his imposing mahogany desk, Carlos stared fixedly at Beatrice, his face a mask of barely contained fury. Seemed to have aged decades in a matter of hours. "I couldn't bear it anymore, Carlos," she replied with a trembling voice. "The weight of guilt. Valeria deserved to know the truth." Carlos stood up abruptly, his chair hitting the wall behind him. "The truth? And what good will that do her now? We've built an empire, Beatrice. Everything we have, everything Valeria will inherit someday, is based on the decisions we made 20 years ago." "Wrong decisions," Beatrice muttered, but Carlos ignored her, continuing his diatribe. "If this comes to light, we'll lose everything. Do you have any idea how this would affect our business, our social position?" Beatrice looked at him with a mixture of sadness and disgust. "Is that all you care about? What about Valeria? What about the woman we took her daughter from?" Carlos stopped short, a shadow of something like remorse crossing his face for an instant before his mask of coldness returned to its place. "What's done is done. We can't change the past. Now we have to control the damage." Meanwhile, in the garden, Valeria had finally managed to calm down enough to speak. Seated on a stone bench next to Elena, her eyes still red and swollen, she tried to process everything she had discovered. "My whole life has been a lie," she said softly, more to herself than to Elena. "Who am I really?" Elena, fighting against the urge to reveal everything she knew, responded carefully, "You are still Valeria. Your experiences, your achievements, your feelings, all of that is real and yours." Valeria looked at her, finding comfort in Elena's calmness. "But my real mother, she's out there somewhere. Maybe looking for me, maybe thinking I abandoned her." Elena's heart skipped a beat. Every fiber of her being screamed to tell the truth, to embrace Valeria and tell her that her search had ended. But fear, that old companion, stopped her. What if Valeria rejected her? What if the truth destroyed the life Valeria had built? "Perhaps," Eleanor finally said, choosing her words carefully. "So your mother is closer than you think?" Valeria looked at her curiously. "What do you mean?" Before Elena could respond, they were interrupted by Carlos's arrival. His face was tense, his cold, calculating eyes evaluating the scene before him. "Valeria, darling," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I've been looking for you. We need to talk." Eleanor quickly stood up, aware of the look of contempt Carlos was giving her. "With your permission, Mr. Lopez, I'll return to my tasks." "Yes, do that," Carlos replied dryly before turning to Valeria. "Let's go inside. There's much to discuss." Valeria hesitated, looking at Elena as if seeking help. Elena gave her a reassuring smile before walking away, her heart heavy with the secrets she still didn't dare to reveal. Back in the mansion, Carlos led Valeria to his study. Beatrice was no longer there, having been sent to calm down in her rooms. "Valeria," Carlos began, his voice soft but firm, "I understand that you're shocked by what Beatrice told you, but you must understand that the circumstances of your adoption are complicated." Valeria looked at him in disbelief. "Complicated? Carlos, I was basically stolen from my biological mother. How can you be so calm about it?" Carlos sighed, as if he were dealing with a stubborn child. "Things are not that simple, dear. Your biological mother, She was not in a condition to care for you. We did what we thought was best for you." "And who decided that?" Valeria asked, her voice trembling with contained rage. "Who were you to make that decision?" "We were a couple who could give you everything," Carlos replied, his voice rising slightly. "A life of privilege, the best education, opportunities you would never have had otherwise." Valeria stood up, unable to contain her frustration. "And that justifies taking a baby from its mother, lying for 20 years. Carlos looked at her fixedly, his face a mask of determination. "What's done is done, Valeria. We can't change the past, but we can protect our future. Think about all you would lose if this came to light. Your position, your inheritance, everything you've worked for." "Is that a threat?" Valeria asked, surprised by Carlos's coldness. "It's a reality," he replied. "The world isn't black and white, Valeria. Sometimes, to protect what we love, we have to make difficult decisions." As Carlos spoke, Valeria felt like she was seeing her husband for the first time. The man she thought she knew and loved was fading away, replaced by someone calculating and manipulative. "I need time," Valeria finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "To think, to process all of this." Carlos nodded, apparently satisfied to have avoided, for the moment, a major crisis. "Take all the time you need, dear, but remember, we are a family, and family protects each other." Valeria left the study feeling more lost than ever. As she walked through the halls of the mansion she had always considered her home, every object, every family portrait, seemed to mock her, reminding her of the great lie she had lived in. Her steps unconsciously led her towards the garden once more. There, among the flowers that had always brought her comfort, Valeria allowed herself to cry again. But this time, her tears were not only of sadness and confusion, but also of determination. As the sun began to set, bathing the garden in golden and reddish hues, Valeria made a decision. No matter the consequences, no matter what she might lose, she needed to discover the truth. And something inside her told her that Elena, the silent gardener who always seemed to know more than she said, was the key to unraveling the mystery of her past. What Valeria didn't know was that, at that very moment, Eleanor was in her small house, holding the necklace and the brooch, debating between fear and love, preparing for a revelation that would change their lives forever. Fate had set its gears in motion, and there was no turning back. The truths buried for so long were about to come to light, with consequences that no one could foresee. Night had fallen over the Lopez mansion, bringing with it an unsettling stillness. In her room, Valeria tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. The day's revelations played over and over in her mind, like an endless movie, mixing with fragments of dreams and memories she wasn't sure were real or imagined. On an impulse, she got up and approached her dressing table. She opened the top drawer and took out a small velvet box that she'd kept hidden for years. Inside rested a delicate gold brooch with inlaid small pearls. It was the only object she had from her life before the Lopezes, although she had never understood its significance. As she held it under the faint moonlight filtering through the window, Valeria felt an inexplicable connection to this small object. Could it be a clue to her true origin? Meanwhile, in her modest house on the mansion grounds, Elena couldn't sleep either. Sitting at her small kitchen table, she contemplated the necklace with the butterfly charm and the photograph it contained. The image of herself, 20 years younger, holding her little Matteo, broke her heart. "How do I tell you, my child?" Elena whispered to the photograph, as if the baby in the image could answer her. "How do I explain that I've been so close and so far at the same time?" The decision to reveal the truth to Valeria weighed on Elena like a slab. She knew that once the words left her mouth, there would be no going back. Everything would change, for better or worse. The next morning, the Lopez mansion seemed to have sunk into a tense silence. Breakfast, normally a formal but friendly affair, took place in an atmosphere charged with unspoken words and evasive glances. Beatrice, with dark circles that betrayed a sleepless night, barely touched her food. Carlos, for his part, acted as if nothing had happened, reviewing his business messages on the phone and commenting on the day's news. Valeria observed her adoptive parents with a mixture of resentment and confusion. How could they act so normally after what had come to light? "I'm going to the garden," Valeria announced abruptly, rising from the table. "But dear, you've barely touched your breakfast," Beatrice protested weakly. "I'm not hungry," Valeria replied dryly before leaving the dining room. Carlos watched her leave with a frown. "Let her be," he told Beatrice when she made a move to follow her. "She needs time to process all this. Meanwhile, we need to make sure this situation doesn't get out of control." In the garden, Valeria walked aimlessly, her thoughts a whirlwind of unanswered questions. Without realizing it, her steps led her towards the area where Elena usually worked. She found her pruning a rosebush, her face a mask of concentration that failed to entirely hide the emotional turmoil she felt. "Elena," Valeria called softly. The gardener startled, almost dropping the pruning shears. "Mrs. Lopez," she responded, straightening up. "How can I help you?" Valeria hesitated for a moment, unsure how to express what she was feeling. Finally, she took the gold brooch from her pocket and showed it to Elena. "This brooch, it's the only thing I have from my life before the Lopezes," Valeria began. "I've always felt it holds some secret, but I never knew what. And now, with everything that's happened... Elena, I know you know more than you're saying. Please, if you know anything at all, I need to know it." Elena looked at the brooch, her face visibly paling. With trembling hands, she took the butterfly charm necklace from her pocket. "Valeria," Elena said, her voice barely a whisper, "there's something I must show you." She opened the locket, revealing the photograph inside. Valeria leaned in to see better, and her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the brooch she was holding on the blouse of the young woman in the photograph. "That woman," Valeria began, her voice trembling. "It's me," Elena completed, tears beginning to run down her cheeks. And that baby is you, Valeria." The world seemed to stop around Valeria. Elena's words echoed in her ears, but her mind struggled to process them. It was as if all the pieces of a puzzle she didn't know she was putting together suddenly fit. You're my mother?" Valeria asked, her voice barely audible. Elena nodded, unable to contain her crying. "Yes, my child. I've been looking for you for so long, and you've been here in front of me all these years." Valeria took a step back, overwhelmed by the revelation. All her life, her real mother had been so close, silently caring for her through the flowers and plants she loved so much. "Why?" was all Valeria managed to ask. A mixture of emotions, confusion, pain, anger, relief, reflected in her voice. Elena took a deep breath, preparing to tell a story she had kept in her heart for 2 decades. 20 years ago, she began, I worked as a domestic employee for a wealthy family in the city. I was pregnant and single, and when my employer, Mrs. Lopez, found out, she offered to help. I thought it was an act of kindness, but... Elena paused, struggling against the pain of the memory. "The day you were born, they told me you had died during childbirth. I was devastated, but something in my heart told me it wasn't true. I started investigating, asking questions, but no one wanted to talk. Finally, I discovered that they had given you up for adoption to the Lopezes." Valeria listened, motionless, each word falling on her like a physical weight. "By the time I discovered the truth, they had already taken you far away. I tried to fight, but I had no resources, no evidence. The Lopezes had all the power and money to silence me. They threatened me, told me that if I ever tried to approach you, they would make sure I never saw you again." Tears were now flowing freely down Elena's face. "So I did the only thing I could do," Elena continued, her voice broken with emotion. "I got a job as a gardener at the Lopez mansion. I knew I couldn't approach you directly, but at least I could be close, watch you grow, even if it was from afar." Valeria listened, paralyzed, each word from Elena sinking deep into her being. All her life, the answers she had been seeking had been so close, hidden among the flowers and bushes she loved so much. "Every flower I planted, every tree I cared for, I did it thinking of you," Elena said, extending her trembling hand towards Valeria, but not daring to touch her. "I wanted to create a beautiful world for you, even if you couldn't know it was my gift." Valeria looked at the garden around her with new eyes. Every rose, every lily, every blade of grass. Everything took on a new meaning. They weren't just plants, they were messages of love from a mother to her daughter. But why didn't you tell me before? Valeria asked, her voice a mixture of pain and confusion. Elena lowered her gaze, the guilt evident on her face. I was afraid that you would reject me, afraid that the Lopezes would fulfill their threats. And with time, I saw you grow, become a strong and successful woman. I wondered if I had the right to burst into your life, to change everything you knew. Valeria staggered, overwhelmed by emotions. She leaned against a nearby tree, her mind a whirlwind of contradictory thoughts and feelings. All my life, she murmured, more to herself than to Elena. All my life I've felt that something was missing, that there was a void I couldn't explain. And now, Elena took a step towards her, caution and hope mixing in her gaze. Valeria. Valeria looked up, meeting Elena's eyes. For the first time, she saw in them the reflection of her own, the same tone, the same shape. How had she not noticed before? I need time, Valeria finally said, her voice barely a whisper. It's too much. Elena nodded, understanding. I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. Just at that moment, Carlos's voice resonated from the mansion. Valeria, where are you? We have an important meeting in half an hour. The intrusion of the outside world broke the moment between mother and daughter. Valeria straightened up, visibly composing herself. I have to go, she said, her voice regaining some of its usual firmness. But this isn't over, Elena. We have a lot to talk about. Elena nodded, watching as Valeria walked away towards the mansion. When she lost sight of her, she fell to her knees among the flowers, finally allowing herself to release all the emotions she had contained for years. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Carlos waited impatiently in the foyer. Seeing Valeria enter, he frowned. Where have you been? And why do you have dirt on your clothes? Don't tell me you've been playing in the garden like a child. Valeria looked at him, seeing for the first time the coldness and calculation in his eyes. This man, who called himself her father, had been complicit in taking her away from her real mother. I wasn't playing, Carlos, she responded with a calmness that surprised even herself. I was discovering the truth. Carlos visibly paled. What are you talking about? I know everything, Valeria said, her voice laden with a new determination, about my adoption, about my real mother. And I warn you, Carlos, this won't stand. Before Carlos could respond, Valeria went up the stairs to her room, leaving him gaping in the foyer. In her room, Valeria closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing herself to collapse. Tears flowed freely as she held the brooch and the necklace, tangible symbols of the truth she had just discovered. As the afternoon sun bathed the Lopez mansion, 3 lives were at a turning point. Valeria, caught between 2 worlds, struggling to reconcile her past with her present. Elena, finally freed from the weight of her secret, but fearful of the uncertain future. And Carlos, watching as the empire he had built on lies began to crumble. The garden, silent witness to so many secrets, waited calmly. To unite a mother with her lost daughter. The truth had come to light, but the consequences of this revelation were just beginning to unfold. Fate had set in motion a series of events that would forever change the lives of all involved, and no one could predict how this story of love, loss, and redemption would end. The days following the revelation were a whirlwind of emotions for all the inhabitants of the Lopez mansion. Valeria had locked herself in her room, refusing to see anyone, not even Carlos or Beatriz. She needed time to process everything she had discovered, to reconcile the life she thought she had with the truth she now knew. Elena, for her part, continued with her duties in the garden, but every movement, every flower she touched, was charged with new meaning. Every time she looked up at the mansion windows, she hoped to see Valeria, yearning for another chance to talk with the daughter she had lost so long ago. Carlos, aware that his carefully constructed world of lies was about to crumble, had plunged into a frenzy of activity. He spent hours locked in his study, making calls, moving money, preparing for what he saw as an inevitable storm. Beatrice, consumed by guilt and remorse, wandered through the mansion like a ghost, unable to find peace anywhere. It was on the afternoon of the third day when Valeria finally emerged from her room. Her face showed signs of sleepless nights and shed tears, but there was a new determination in her eyes. She went directly to the garden, where she found Elena working on a bed of lilies. Seeing her approach, Elena stood up, her heart beating hard. "Valeria," she said softly, unsure how to proceed. Valeria looked at her intently for a moment before speaking. "I need answers, Elena. The whole truth, omitting nothing." Elena nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment. "Of course. Where do you want to start?" "From the beginning," Valeria replied. "I want to know everything about my birth, about how I ended up with the Lopezes, about why you never tried, why you never fought harder for me." The last part came out as a pained whisper, and Elena felt her heart break a little more. "Come with me," Elena said, guiding Valeria to a stone bench hidden among the bushes. It was a quiet corner of the garden, a place where Elena often sat to think about her lost daughter. Once seated, Elena began her story, her voice trembling slightly at first, but gaining strength as she spoke. "I was very young when I got pregnant," she began. "Your father, he disappeared as soon as he found out. I found myself alone, scared, and without resources. That's when I started working for the Lopezes as a domestic employee." Valeria listened attentively, each word etching itself in her memory. "Beatriz Lopez couldn't have children," Elena continued. "When she found out about my pregnancy, she offered to help. She promised me medical care, a safe place to live. I was so grateful, so naive." Elena paused, fighting against the tears that threatened to spill. "The day you were born was the happiest and most terrible day of my life. I held you in my arms for a brief moment, and then they took you away from me. They told me you had died during childbirth, that it had been an unexpected complication." Valeria gasped, horrified at the cruelty of the lie. "I was devastated," Elena continued, "but something in my heart told me it wasn't true. I started asking questions, investigating. That's when the threats began. Carlos warned me that if I kept searching, he would make sure I never saw you again." "And you simply gave up?" Valeria asked, unable to contain the accusatory tone in her voice. Elena lowered her gaze, the guilt evident on her face. "No, I didn't give up. But I didn't have the means to fight them legally either. They were powerful. They had connections. I was just a young woman with no education, no money. How you became a beautiful and strong woman. Every day I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was afraid that you would reject me, afraid that the Lopezes would fulfill their threats." Valeria remained silent for a moment, processing all the information. Then, with a trembling voice, she asked the question that had been burning inside her since she discovered the truth. "Did you love me? All these years, as you watched me grow from afar, did you really love me?" Elena took Valeria's hands in hers, her eyes full of tears but also of unconditional love. "Valeria, my child, there hasn't been a single day in these 20 years that I haven't loved you with all my being, every flower I planted, every tree I cared for. I did thinking of you. You were the sun that gave me strength to go on, the reason I got up every morning." Elena's words broke something inside Valeria, years of repressed emotions, of a void she had never been able to explain, overflowed in a torrent of tears. Without thinking, she threw herself into Eleanor's arms, allowing herself for the first time to feel the embrace of her true mother. Eleanor enveloped her in her arms, her own tears mixing with those of her daughter. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. All the years of separation, of pain and longing dissolved in that embrace. But the peace of the moment was ephemeral. A cry of rage broke the silence of the garden. "Get away from her!" Valeria and Elena separated, startled. There, standing a few meters away, was Carlos Lopez, his face contorted with fury and fear. "Carlos, please," Valeria began, standing up. But Carlos wasn't listening. His world, carefully built on lies and manipulation, was crumbling before his eyes. "You!" he shouted, pointing at Elena. "I warned you what would happen if you ever told her the truth." Elena stood up, protectively placing herself in front of Valeria. "It's over, Mr. Lopez. No more lies, no more threats. Valeria deserves to know the truth." Carlos took a threatening step towards them. but Valeria interposed herself between him and Elena. "Enough. Carlos," she said in a voice that admitted no argument, "I've discovered the truth, and nothing you do or say can change that." The determination in Valeria's voice seemed to deflate Carlos. For the first time, he saw in her not the child he had raised, but a strong and determined woman, so similar to the mother he had separated her from. "You don't understand," Carlos said, his voice breaking. "We did it for you. We gave you a life she could never have given you." "A life based on lies," Valeria replied, her voice trembling with contained emotion. "A life in which I was robbed of the opportunity to know my real mother. That's not love, Carlos. It's selfishness." Valeria's words were like a physical blow to Carlos. He stepped back, his face a mask of shock and denial. "This isn't over," he muttered, before turning around and hurriedly returning to the mansion. Valeria and Elena remained there in the middle of the garden, aware that they had just crossed a point of no return. The storm that had been brewing for 20 years had finally broken, and no one could predict what the world would be like once it dissipated. Valeria took Elena's hand, seeking comfort in the contact. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice a whisper laden with uncertainty. Elena gently squeezed her daughter's hand. "Now, my child, we begin to heal. Together." As the sun began to set over the Lopez mansion garden, mother and daughter remained united, facing together the uncertain future that unfolded before them. The truth had come to light, but the consequences of this revelation were just beginning. The days following the confrontation in the garden were a whirlwind of emotions and changes at the Lopez mansion. The truth, so carefully buried for 2 decades, now surfaced with an unstoppable force. Frantic calls to lawyers and advisors. Beatrice, consumed by guilt, wandered through the mansion like a ghost, unable to look Valeria in the eye. Valeria, for her part, found herself in an emotional limbo. On one hand, she felt a deep and undeniable connection with Elena, a bond that went beyond words and seemed to fill that void she had always felt. On the other hand, she couldn't deny the years of affection and care that Beatrice and Carlos had provided her, despite the terrible lie on which their relationship was based. One morning, as Valeria was walking through the garden, lost in her thoughts, she found Beatrice sitting on a bench, her gaze lost in the distance. "Mom." "Beatrice," Valeria corrected herself. Unsure how to address the woman who had raised her, Beatrice looked up, her eyes red from crying. "Valeria, my child, I'm so sorry. We never meant to hurt you." Valeria sat down next to her, a whirlwind of contradictory emotions inside her. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why did you do it?" Beatrice took a deep breath before answering. I couldn't have children. We tried for years, but nothing worked. When we met Elena," voice trembling with contained emotion, "you told her I had died. Do you have any idea of the pain you caused her?" Tears were running freely down Beatrice's face. "I know, and I'll live with that guilt for the rest of my life. At the time, we told ourselves it was best for everyone. But now I see how selfish we were." Valeria remained silent for a moment, processing Beatrice's words. Finally, she spoke. "I love you, Beatrice. That's not going to change. You were a good mother to me in many ways, but what you did, I can't forgive it so easily." Beatrice nodded, understanding. "I don't expect your forgiveness, Valeria. I just want you to know that, despite how it all started, my love for you was always real." At that moment, Valeria extended a hand towards Elena, inviting her to join them. Cautiously, Elena approached, sitting on the other side of Valeria. "I think it's time for the 3 of us to have an honest conversation," Valeria said, her voice firm despite the emotions that overwhelmed her. For the next few hours, the 3 women talked, cried, and, at times, even laughed. Beatrice shared the anguish of her years of infertility. Elena spoke of the heartbreaking pain of losing her daughter, and Valeria expressed the confusion and emptiness she had always felt, even in the midst of a privileged life. As the sun began to set, bathing the garden in golden hues, the 3 came to a tacit understanding. The path to healing would be long and difficult, but they were willing to try for Valeria's sake and for their own. Meanwhile, in the mansion's study, Carlos faced his own demons. Years of manipulation and lies had led him to this point, and now he saw everything he had worked for crumbling around him. A knock on the door pulled him from his somber thoughts. It was Valeria, her face a mask of determination. "We need to talk," she said. "No," Valeria interrupted him, her voice firm. "Don't try to justify yourself. What you and Beatrice did was cruel and unforgivable, but I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to tell you that, despite everything, you're still my father." Carlos looked at her, surprised by her words. "Chuck, you raised me. You gave me opportunities, Count. You loved me in your way," Valeria continued. "That doesn't change with this revelation, but our relationship will change. I'm no longer the child you can manipulate or control. I'm a woman who now knows the truth and who will make her own decisions." "What do you mean?" Carlos asked, a fear growing inside him. "I'm going to publicly acknowledge Elena as my biological mother," Valeria declared. "Oisak, and I'm going to use my position and resources to help her obtain the justice she deserves. But also," she added, seeing the look of panic on Carlos's face, "I will protect this family from any legal consequences. Not for you, but for Beatrice and for the Lopez name, which, like it or not, is part of who I am." Carlos slumped in his chair, overwhelmed by Valeria's words. For the first time, he saw in her not the child he had raised, but a strong and determined woman, capable of making difficult decisions with compassion and wisdom. "Valeria, he began, but the words failed him. "I don't need you to say anything now," Valeria said. "I just need you to understand that things are going to change, and I hope you're willing to be part of that change." With those words, Valeria left the study, leaving Carlos alone with his thoughts and the weight of his past actions. That night, as the Lopez mansion sank into a silence charged with emotions and promises of change, Valeria found herself once again in the garden. Elena was there, tending to a rosebush in the moonlight. Without a word, Valeria joined her, her hands working alongside those of her biological mother, planting new seeds in the rich Imte's dark earth. It was a symbolic act, a silent promise of a new beginning. As they worked, Valeria felt a peace she had never experienced before. The garden, and although the road ahead would be difficult, Valeria knew she was no longer alone. She had the love of two mothers, the strength of her own determination, and the promise of a future that, for the first time, she could build on foundations of honesty and true love. As the moon shone over the Lopez mansion garden, mother and daughter continued to work in silence, planting the seeds of their new relationship and of a life transformed by truth and forgiveness. The following months were a period of profound transformation for all the inhabitants of the Lopez mansion. The truth, once revealed, had acted as a catalyst, triggering a series of changes that no one could have foreseen. Valeria, true to her word, began the legal process to recognize Elena as her biological mother. The news caused a stir in the social and business circles in which the Lopezes moved, but Valeria remained firm, facing each challenge with unwavering determination. Elena, for her part, flourished under the love and recognition of her daughter. Although she continued to work in the garden, her role in the mansion had changed drastically. She was no longer the invisible gardener, but a respected and beloved presence. Valeria insisted that she move into a comfortable suite within the mansion, but Elena preferred to keep her modest house on the grounds, a reminder of the years of waiting and hope. Carlos, facing the consequences of his actions, surprised everyone with a change in attitude. Initially reluctant and defensive, he slowly began to show signs of genuine repentance. One afternoon, he sought out Elena in the garden. "Elena," he said, his voice laden with contained emotion, "I know no apology will be enough to make up for what we did to you, but I want you to know that I am truly sorry." Elena looked at him, seeing for the first time the vulnerability behind the facade of a powerful man. "Mr. Lopez," she began, but Carlos interrupted her. "Carlos, please, I think after everything that's happened, we can leave the formalities behind." Elena nodded. "Carlos, forgiveness is a long road. I can't say I've forgiven you completely, but I'm willing to try for Valeria's sake." Carlos nodded, grateful for the opportunity, however small it might be. Beatrice, consumed by guilt, found solace in concrete actions. She dedicated herself to supporting charities that worked with young mothers and children in vulnerable situations, channeling her remorse into something positive. One afternoon, as Valeria and Elena worked together in the garden, planting a new magnolia tree, a symbol of perseverance and dignity, Valeria shared a decision she had been pondering. "Mom," she said, the word still new and precious on her lips, "I've been thinking about using my position and resources to create a foundation, one that helps reunite separated families, that fights against illegal adoptions, and that supports mothers in vulnerable situations." Elena's eyes filled with tears of pride and emotion. "That would be wonderful, my child. You could make a real difference in so many people's lives." Valeria smiled, feeling that for the first time in her life, she had a clear purpose, a mission that went beyond business and social status. "I want us to work on this together," she continued. "Your experience, your strength, Mom, you're an inspiration. Together we can ensure that no other mother or child goes through what we went through." Elena hugged her daughter, overwhelmed by love and pride. "I'll be by your side every step of the way, my love." As they worked in the garden, Carlos approached timidly. "Valeria, Elena, may I join you?" There was a moment of tension, but Valeria, seeing the sincerity in Carlos's eyes, nodded. "There's another shovel over there. We're planting a magnolia tree." Carlos took the shovel and began to work alongside them, his movements clumsy at first, but gaining confidence with each spadeful. It was a small step, but a significant one. A family, broken and recomposed, working together to create something new and beautiful. As the sun began to set, bathing the garden in a golden light, the four, Valeria, Elena, Carlos, and Beatrice, who had silently joined them, stood around the young magnolia tree. Each had contributed to planting it, a symbol of their commitment to grow together, to heal the wounds of the past and build a future based on truth and love. Valeria looked around at the people who, in different ways, were her family. She saw the unconditional love in Elena's eyes, the repentance and hope in those of Carlos and Beatrice, and for the first time in her life, she felt she was exactly where she was meant to be. "This tree," Valeria said, her voice soft but firm, "will grow strong and beautiful, like us. Its roots will sink deep into the earth, like our family ties, and its branches will reach towards the sky, like our hopes for the future." Elena took Valeria's hand and then, in a gesture that surprised everyone, extended her other hand towards Beatrice. After a moment of hesitation, Beatrice took it, tears of gratitude in her eyes. Carlos, seeing this, ventured to put a hand on Valeria's shoulder. She didn't pull away, silently accepting the gesture. Thus, united around the young tree, the recomposed Lopez Morales family took their first steps towards a future of healing and reconciliation. The garden, silent witness to so many secrets and pains, now became the stage for a new beginning. As night gently fell over the mansion, the stars began to shine in the sky, silent witnesses to the transformation that had occurred. Love, truth, and forgiveness had triumphed over lies and selfishness, paving the way for a future full of possibilities. Valeria, looking at the stars, felt a peace she had never experienced before. She had finally found her place in the world, her true identity, and with the love of her biological mother, the wisdom gained through pain, and the promise of a new purpose in life, she was ready to face any challenge the future might bring. The garden, once the scene of secrets and pain, now stood as a testament to renewal and hope. And at its center, the young magnolia tree reached towards the sky, its branches extend. A year had passed since that day when they planted the magnolia tree. The Lopez mansion, once a symbol of opulence and secrets, had transformed into a place of healing and new beginnings. The garden, always beautiful, now overflowed with life and meaning. Every flower, every shrub, every tree told a story of forgiveness, love, and redemption. And at the center of it all, the magnolia tree stood strong and proud, its first flowers beginning to open, a living testimony to change and growth. Valeria found herself in her office in the city, reviewing the final details of the Morales-Lopez Foundation, the project that had been born from her desire to help other families separated by unjust circumstances. The foundation, still in its early stages, had already managed to reunite several families and provide legal and emotional support to mothers in vulnerable situations. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Eleanor, entering with a warm smile and a cup of tea. "I thought you might need a break, dear," Eleanor said, placing the cup on Valeria's desk. Valeria smiled, grateful not only for the tea but for her mother's constant and loving presence. "Thank you, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you." Eleanor sat down across from Valeria, her eyes shining with pride and love. "You've achieved so much in such a short time, my child. I'm so proud of you." Valeria took her mother's hand. "We've achieved it together, Mum. You are the heart of all this." At that moment, Carlos entered the office, his face showing signs of fatigue, but also of a peace he didn't have before. "Excuse the interruption, but I have important news." Valeria and Elena looked at him expectantly. Carlos had been working tirelessly to redirect the Lopez company's resources towards more ethical and charitable causes, a way of amending the mistakes of the past. "The board has unanimously approved our proposal," Carlos announced. "From now on, 30% of the company's profits will go directly to the foundation." Valeria jumped up, hugging Carlos with an emotion that surprised everyone, including herself. "That's wonderful, Dad. This will change so many lives." Carlos, still not used to these displays of affection, returned the hug awkwardly but sincerely. "It's the least we can do, Valeria. You've taught us the true meaning of family and responsibility." Eleanor observed the scene with tears in her eyes. Seeing her daughter and the man who had once caused her so much pain working together for a greater good was a testament to the power of forgiveness and redemption. "We should celebrate," Elena suggested. "How about dinner in the garden tonight? We'll invite Beatrice too." Everyone agreed, and that night the Lopez mansion garden filled with laughter and conversation. Under the magnolia tree, now adorned with its first white and fragrant flowers, the recomposed family shared a meal. Beatrice, who had found a new purpose in her work with charitable organizations, animatedly shared her experiences. "I never thought helping others could bring so much satisfaction," she said, her eyes shining with a light that had been absent for years. Carlos, more relaxed than anyone had ever seen him, listened with genuine interest. His transformation, though slow and sometimes painful, was evident to everyone. Valeria observed her family, marveling at how things had changed in just 1 year. The pain and secrets that had once threatened to destroy them had become the catalyst for their transformation and growth. When dessert was served, Valeria stood up, raising her glass. "I want to make a toast," she said, her voice charged with emotion. "To family in all its forms, to forgiveness, which has allowed us to heal, to truth, which, though painful, has freed us, and to love, which has been our guide on this journey." Everyone raised their glasses, tears mixing with smiles on their faces. "And I want to announce something," Valeria continued, taking Elena's hand. "Mom, we've decided to officially change the name of the foundation. From now on, it will be known as the Elena Morales Foundation, in honor of the woman whose strength and unconditional love inspired all of this." Elena brought a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by emotion. "Valeria, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything, Mom," Valeria replied, hugging her. "Your life, your struggle, your love, that says everything that needs to be said." As the night progressed, the conversation flowed freely, full of plans for the future and reflections on the past. The garden, bathed in soft moonlight and the scent of blooming magnolias, seemed to vibrate with the promise of new beginnings. Later, when everyone had retired, Valeria remained alone in the garden. She walked to the magnolia tree, gently touching one of its white petals. "We've come a long way," she murmured to herself, "and there's still so much to do." She looked towards the mansion, where the light still shone warmly. In one window she saw Elena's silhouette, watching her with love. In another, Carlos and Beatrice were talking, their postures relaxed and open. Valeria smiled, feeling a deep peace in her heart. The garden, once the scene of secrets and pain, was now a testament to love, forgiveness, and new beginnings, and she, Valeria Lopez Morales, was ready to face any challenge the future might bring, with the strength of her true identity and the love of her recomposed family. As she headed back to the house, Valeria made a silent promise. She would continue to cultivate this garden of love and truth, not just for her family, but for all those who needed a place of healing and hope. The wind whispered through the leaves of the magnolia tree, as if nature itself approved of her resolution. And so, under a starry sky and with a heart full of purpose, Valeria entered the house, ready to write the next chapter of her life, a life transformed by truth, redeemed by love, and dedicated to making the world a better place.